When you're in that place of perfect light and perfect love and perfect peace, all you want to do is the will of God. So I asked, is this the divine will for my life? And before I could even get past, is this the divine? The answer was no. But whatever you decide, you go with all of God's peace, you go with all of God's blessing and mercy and care and love. There isn't a wrong decision.
As we begin the podcast today, feel your angels surround you and sing to you. You are a miracle. Your life is a miracle. The good that you choose to do today is a miracle received by other souls. And just because you're you, God, Universe, Source sends you big and small miracles this day and every day. Right now, invite your angels to guide you. Ask God, Universe, Source for what your heart wants. See it as if you're in the future and what you want is already yours now. And so it is. I love you and I'm so grateful you're here that I have some freebies for you. I worked with the angels to create 31 meditations that are going to make you a magnet for miracles. Get them free at theangelmedium.com. Want to be my angel? Leave this podcast 5 stars or a 5-star positive review, and I'll enter you into a drawing to win a free reading with me. Use the form at theangelmedium.com/contact to send me your contact info so I know who to call when you win. Use that same contact form to submit your angel stories, what you're struggling with, or a question, which I'll answer on this podcast or Instagram at Angel Podcast. That's theangelmedium.com/contact. Thank you for being my angel. And remember, angels and miracles are your birthright, and they're activated when you believe. So ask, believe, and receive your miracles. Hello, beautiful souls. Welcome back to the Angels and Awakening podcast. I'm your host and author, Julie Jancius. Today we have on Rosemary Thornton, who's here to share her story of what she saw on the other side. Her book is called Remembering the Light: How Dying Saved My Life. Rosemary, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Where are you at in the world?
I live in the St. Louis area.
Oh, okay. Wonderful. I was raised a little bit in St. Charles, Missouri.
That's not far at all.
Oh, that's so funny. So I want to talk about your story because I think it influences then your journey on the other side. You lost your husband. 2 years after you lost your husband, you were diagnosed with cancer. Can you
Right.
talk to us a little bit about your story?
That's a big question. uh, well, I was a writer before he died, and I had written 9 books and written and published. Actually, like most people, I've written a lot more than I've published. Just an aside, my favorite musical artist is Harry Chapin. And Harry Chapin has this great quote that he wrote 400 songs before any of them got published. And
Mm.
writing's a lot like that. You just write and write and write. But anyway, I had always been a writer, worked briefly at different newspapers and magazines, websites, written for pretty much everybody in every way. So, like many writers, I was a bit neurotic, tend to overthink things. And yet I had also always believed very much in a divine presence guiding me. Norman Vincent Peale had this beautiful quote that I memorized, I probably in my early 20s, but I believe I'm always divinely guided. I believe I will always take the right turn of the road. And I believe that God will make a way where there is no way. And I have said that to myself probably every day for 40 plus years. So prior to my husband's death, he ended his own life at our home on the East Coast. I had been tormented by recurring dreams that my husband had died violently. And in the dreams, I didn't know what had happened, but I knew that I was suddenly alone. and I had to leave my beautiful home, and we did have a beautiful home right on a lake, and it was very peaceful and tranquil. We had a good life, I thought.
Mhm.
So I had this recurring dream that he had died violently, and in the dream, I was very puzzled as to what exactly happened, but now I was alone, and I had to leave my beautiful home and go find a place to live. And I had these dreams over and over and over again, and one day in my waking hours, my husband and I always had breakfast together in the mornings. He usually made me breakfast, which I really appreciated. But one morning, he was getting ready to go to town, as he would say. He had on his fancy suit and he was going to a professional office in the downtown district. And he would always say, I'm going to town now, Rosemary. It's really kind of sweet. And as he walked out the door, I very distinctly heard a being, an angelic being, standing beside me, very clearly say, he will be gone soon. So prepare yourself for this next chapter of your life. And I immediately dismissed it as something not good. And I doubled down on my daily prayers for him, that God would cover him in light and love and peace, and that the angels would keep him safe and bring him home to me. It was just a few days later that he ended his life, and he did it at our home. And so that was the end of me being able to be in that home. So those dreams that had tormented me were now my reality, the nightmares. For 29 months, I had 3 prayers I prayed every day. One was, "Heal me or let me go." 2 was, "When I die, spare me the life of you." I thought I was an accomplished, successful, professional, interesting, intellectual woman, and now I was reduced to just a pile of misery, darkness, and sadness. So my prayer was, when I go, I knew it wouldn't be long. I knew I couldn't survive this much grief and trauma. I asked that I be spared the life review because I'd always been a big fan of NDEs and had always read, oh my goodness, starting with Raymond Moody's little trade paperback, Life After Life, pretty much memorized that one. I think it came out in 76, not sure. And then Daniel Brinkley and Betty Eadie and George Ritchie. And I read them. I gobbled them up and read them again and again and again. I knew that we had a life review and I knew I didn't want to see mine because I had always thought of myself as somebody who had accomplished some things in life, and now I thought I failed. I
Mm.
failed in every way a human being can fail. And this man for whom I prayed, who I considered to be the love of my life, was gone. And he told me probably early on that he felt we were soulmates. I mean, it was so many goofy things that we found about each other that were so aligned. And then to think that I spent 45 years looking for him and he was dead after only 10 was too much to bear. In our wedding vows when we were married, because I was in my mid 40s when we got married, in my wedding vows, I publicly affirmed that he was the answer to a lifetime of prayers. I had been married before, and that marriage ended in divorce. And I was always deeply grieved that despite my best prayers, that marriage had ended. And this second marriage felt like the answer to all those prayers. Then my prayers got answered, but in a different way. So my third prayer was that I was tired of decisions. I had severe decision fatigue. After somebody ends their life, things get pretty mucky and messy, and there are a lot of very difficult decisions to be made. And I was suffering from profound decision fatigue. And one of the stories I tell, it's kind of funny now, but I couldn't even decide what to wear in the morning. So I bought a dozen white polo shirts and 3 or 4 pairs of blue jeans. So every morning I woke up and I'm like, oh, what will I wear? Oh, yeah, white polo shirt. But that's decision fatigue when you can't even face what to wear. And I couldn't eat. I was so profoundly distressed and depressed. I literally couldn't eat. I lost about 30 or 35 pounds. I lost a tremendous amount of weight. And I just stopped eating. I was living on those protein shakes. And a lot of days I could only get half of one down. So that's a pretty big mess. 29 months thus passed after his death, and I cried in the shower a lot. I think that's kind of an interesting test of trauma is when the warm water hits you and your body kind of relaxes. And every time in the shower, I just burst into tears. It was like I could let the guard down. And I did. I cried in the shower a lot. So I did ask God, heal me or let me go. Mainly, I just wanted to be dead. I had a plan to end my own life. The only thing that kept me from doing it was one, sheer will. I wanted to be gone so bad. The guilt. Oh my gosh. I wish somebody could do a podcast about the guilt that people such as me were known as suicide survivors because a loved one ended their life. The amount of guilt we face. And by the way, we talk a lot during September, that suicide prevention or awareness month or something. I turn off Facebook. I
Mhm.
turn off social media because people who talk about suicide prevention, most of them are clueless. If we really want to have a serious talk about suicide prevention, we need to look at the fact that suicide survivors, such as me, who've lost a spouse or a child to suicide, are 12 to 48 times more likely to end their own life. And yet, what happens when we lose somebody that way? We become a pariah. We become a 21st century leper. I really felt like a leper, that I had to walk down the street yelling, unclean, 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 because people stayed away from me. And my husband and I had an impressive array of accomplished, successful friends. And boy, after this happened, they fled like rats deserting a sinking ship. And yet, what's fascinating is the people who rushed into the fray, the people who came in to save me, to keep me from being swallowed up in this horror. They were what the world might call working class, middle class. They were the people just trying to get by themselves day by day, and yet they literally rushed in to save me. There was a point that I began living out of my car. It was a nice car, Camry, heated seats, sunroof, nice sound system. Really love that car. But I just couldn't get comfortable anywhere. And the car felt very cocoonish and very safe. And a friend of mine, again, very average woman working a hard job, and her husband worked a hard job. She said, "You're not sleeping in that car anymore. You're coming home to live with me." And I said, "Nope, tried living with other people, didn't work out. Nightmares, screaming, sleepwalking. I had it all." I said, "Nope, not living with you." And she insisted. She
Mm.
pulled her "I'm the mother and that's that" voice. So I lived with her for 4 months. And I
Wow.
was a mess. I still wandered her house. I still woke up screaming. Her name was Tracy. Many times Tracy would appear at the side of my bed in her own guest bedroom, shaking me awake and saying, "Rosemary, it's okay. You're safe. You're here." But the violence with which suicide takes someone out is something nobody talks about either, or the rest of the story. And I won't go into that because that's not what this is about. But I was a hot mess. And then 29 months out, I went to the doctor for some alarming symptoms. I was diagnosed with cervical cancer stage 2. I was sent to an oncologist. The oncologist did some things and said, "Yep, stage 2." And I got all the, we caught it early, it's good stuff. I had a minor, haha, minor surgical thing done, and they made a boo-boo and they cut something that shouldn't have been cut. And I woke up in the recovery room and I said, "Something's wrong. Something's real wrong because I'm bleeding a lot." And they said, "Oh, once you get home, lie down, you'll feel better." They told me that 3 times. The nurse that was attending me in recovery sent me home. I went home. At home, I realized things were going from bad to worse. I went and stood in the shower because when you're bleeding out and you've got white carpet, bad combination.
Oh,
When you're dying, housekeeping's really important. And I was very concerned because, I don't want to leave my heirs a messy house. So I had a friend in the living room, actually a pair of friends, and I stepped out. I actually thought about just letting myself go in the bathroom. 'Cause, I mean, go to heaven from the bathroom in the shower there in my nice white shower stall, because I thought, I've been asking God, heal me or let me go. Maybe this is the answer to a prayer. Maybe this is the let me go part. And I thought, I'm not doing it to myself. In fact, I followed medical advice. I did everything the doctor said I should do. And now I'm dying. So I did everything right. And so I thought about that. And I thought, all I have to do is sit down on the floor of this shower and this will be over. Nobody will ever say a word except poor mom. Went to the doctor and it all went bad. So I decided that that really wasn't the perfect will for my life, to die in a shower. So I stepped out of the shower, went into my living room, told my friends, "Call 911. I'm bleeding to death." Ambulance came. They took me to a nearby ER. And this shouldn't be legal, but it was an ER not attached to a hospital. It was a standalone ER. They made some more mistakes, kind of greased the skids to the afterlife for me. In that ER, my blood pressure was plunging and they didn't really address that. And in fact, I'm not sure really what transpired there, but they gave me a morphine derivative, which was real bad news. And, I've given this talk in public a handful of times. And when I tell the part that I'm bleeding to death and my blood pressure's going down, and then they give me a morphine derivative to calm me down, and I can always tell the medical personnel in the audience because they go, "Oh."
oh no.
Nobody can believe, because morphine depresses blood pressure and respiration. So the funny thing is, not funny, curious, this nurse in this ER, very motherly, sweet-natured nurse, had held my hand right before they gave me the morphine. She'd held my hand and she said, she was very motherly, and I was crying because, interesting side effect of bleeding out, your brain consumes 70% of the body's energy. Isn't that fascinating? Brain is an energy hog. And what happens when you're bleeding out is not getting adequate red blood cells, adequate oxygen, adequate anything. And so you become more anxious.
Yeah.
So, way to stoke those fires. And I did. And so I grabbed this nurse's hand and I said, "Promise me you're not going to let me die." And she said, "Oh, honey, we have many solutions for this. We're not going to let you die." And I believed her. And she sounded very genuine, and she was very genuine. She was a good person. So that was kind of the last things I said before I lost consciousness. And fortunately, my friend who'd been with me in my living room was by my side. He sat on a little stool beside the gurney that I was on. And he said, I lost consciousness pretty quick. Interesting thing is, he said my blood pressure at one point hit 33 over 25, which for all practical purposes is pretty much dead. He was getting ready to get up and get the nurse, but he said, I woke up. You ever heard of the term terminal lucidity?
Yeah.
At the very end of life, it's like this spurt of energy where people who are mostly dead do amazing things. And it's usually just a very short spurt of energy, very lasts for seconds, maybe a minute. Well, he said, my eyes popped open and he said, you tried to sit up on the gurney. And he said, you reached your hands up to heaven and looked up to heaven and talked to somebody only you could see. And he said,
Wow.
and after that, you dropped your hands back to your side, you dropped your arms back down, and your eyes shut. And he said, then you got very still. And that's when the alarm went off on the blood pressure machine. So the nurse came running down the hallway and they did this sternal rub. It's so good to have a witness to your life and death. But they did this sternal rub where they take their little gnarly knuckles and rake them over your sternum. And because it's supposed to elicit a pain response, if anybody has any consciousness in them whatsoever, they'll flinch or do something. And this cracks me up. He said, then she went over to the blood pressure machine and checked the power cord. Like, well, this thing stopped working. So then she summoned the nurse. He got put out of the room. Crash cart came flying. Meanwhile, I'm having the time of my life, quite literally.
Amazing. Yeah, because not everybody knows NDE means near death experience, but this is what you had. I want to
It
know
is.
everything.
Well, the last thing I remember was that nurse looking at me. Actually, the very last thing I remember was they had given me that painkiller via an IV. They had an IV in my arm, and they had given that to me via IV. And boy, that hit me hard and fast. And I think now the reason it hit me so hard was because I was down a few pints.
Mm.
So it probably just went straight to my heart, and my heart went.
Join me for these upcoming events. We're hosting the Angel Reiki Mediumship School live in person again this fall and spring. Event dates are up at theangelmedium.com/events. Space is limited. Reserve your spot today. And as a bonus, I'm giving you access to our 8-week online Angel Reiki Mediumship School so that you can get started as soon as you register. Don't want to come in person? That's okay. You can still earn your certifications in mediumship, angel messages, and energy healing in our 8-week online program with a new online class and Zoom calls starting on the first of each month. Did you know one Wednesday evening of each month, I host a free group prayer event open to all? And right afterwards, I teach you a new tool to work with your angels or loved ones in heaven. Sign up today free at theangelmedium.com/events, and we'll send you the Zoom link to participate. You'll also find details on our upcoming spiritual retreat, October 4th, 5th, and 6th, 2024 at theangelmedium.com/events. So excited to work with you. Now back to the show.
But I remember my very last words on this earth were, "That's some really good stuff." And it was. I understand why people get addicted to that stuff. But yeah, I remember I was awakened from a deep dreamless state, floating away from my body.
Hmm.
And I felt like I popped out of my body like toast out of a toaster. It was very profound. It was right on the cusp of being jarring,
Could
but it
you
was
feel
not
it?
jarring. Yes, very much so.
What
And
did
I
it
knew
feel like?
exactly what was happening. It really, one of the images, and this doesn't make sense to me because so much of my story doesn't match traditional near death experiences. And by the
Mm,
way, I don't like the nomenclature near death experience. I prefer
mm,
temporary death experience. Near death
love
is
it.
when, something bad happens. You're like, oh my gosh, I almost died there.
Mm,
No, that's you got near death. I had a
mm.
temporary death. I died,
Wow.
got kicked out of heaven. So it really felt like, and I remember this image as it unfolded, that there was this silver, sinewy rope or cord from the crown of my head to the bottom of my feet, and almost like an archer's bow that somebody had pulled back and released. And when that pop hit my back, my soul went flying out. And I mean, flying out. And I was floating, and I was floating away from my body. And yet people say, "Oh, did you see your body?" I did not. The blackness I would describe as velvety, soft, actually actively comforting me blackness. It was
Mm,
perfect peace. I know a lot of people talk about the love, and I did experience love, but as somebody who's really struggled with anxiety my entire life, the peace was profound. And my
wow.
very first thought was, because I've always been, I guess, kind of a quasi intellectual. I love to read. I love vocabulary. I mean, I'm that person that when I find a new vocabulary word, I write it down on a list and I review it every day. So now I have a new vocabulary word.
Well, not to mention that you're a journalist and you're a
Right.
writer, and you
Right.
don't write things that aren't truth. I mean, you get to the truth and the heart of things, and that's the essence of what you do and what you write.
That's true. That's a good point. I hadn't thought of it quite that way. Yeah, there was a book called What Color is Your Parachute? I read it years ago, and all I remember is the point everyone comes to this earth to bring more beauty into the world or bring more truth into the world. So I
Mhm.
always thought of writing as I brought more beauty and more truth.
Love
I
that.
hope.
Yes.
But yeah, that's the only thing I remember from that book. So in this experience, my very first thought was, one, how peaceful, how
Mm,
perfectly peaceful. And I had no wish to see my body, which I learned later that there were some messy things happening with my body.
mm,
But so I think that was God's mercy, actually. But my very first thought was, my heart has stopped. And I thought, how do I know that? I thought, I don't know how I know that, but I know that's right. And then my next thought was, you're dying. And then I thought, actually, you're not dying, you're dead. Because when you're going on to your reward, the most important thing is correcting your tense. I'm that person on social media when I see somebody not use a contraction properly or misspell something, I'm like, my favorite is when somebody says, I'm defiantly going to the movie tonight when they mean definitely. And I say, why not just go? Why do it with defiance? Why not do it with gentleness? Don't go defiantly, go gently.
That's it's such a good point. My dad came through, and I started out as, writing in my journalism school, like, in high school, 14 years old, but carried that through college, and my dad started coming through when he was passed, and I didn't know he was gone because we weren't
Mhm.
talking at the time, and every time I would brush my kiddo's hair, I'd hear, "She needs a hairbrush like I used. She needs a hairbrush like I used." And it was so frustrating because it would repeat over and over, but only every time I brushed her hair. And it was the tense used. And I go,
Oh, yeah.
that's not me.
Ah,
That's not me.
yeah, the language is so important. The Bible says in the
Yeah.
beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Words have tremendous power.
Mhm.
Sometimes when I'm really, really sick or feel really, really crummy, I will say words that seem so nutty, but I'll say, "Oh, I'm so miserable. I feel so bad. Oh, I hate this." But then I stop and I say, I'm struggling with this, but I'm going to say, I have the ability to remember perfect health. And I'm going to just think about perfect health. And I'm just going to enjoy the perfect health I've always known. And invariably, I start to feel a little bit better. The words we say to ourselves are so powerful, so
Yeah.
powerful. So, yeah, my thought was actually, you're not dying, you're dead. And that cracked me up because I think I'm really funny, you know? And I thought, this is great because here I am, obviously having left my human form, going on to whatever's next, and very excited about all that. And everything I really am went with me because I heard my voice and I heard myself giggle because I'm pretty funny. And I thought everything I went with me, my macabre sense of humor, my intellectual musings about the world around me, my proper grammar, all of it went with me, and I remember thinking, "I don't have breath sounds. I'm pretty sure I don't have ear canals and eardrums and vocal cords and the things by which we produce and hear sound," and I thought, "Yet I'm hearing myself talk. I am talking. I sound like I've always sounded." I actually started life in broadcasting a billion years ago, radio, and I thought, "This is great." Everything I am has gone with me down to my funny little giggle because I did giggle and I heard it and it was great. So I was like, wow. And then I asked myself, what exactly did I leave on that gurney? If all this good stuff has come with me, all that I really am. And, I've shared this many times, but it really felt like my whole life I'd lived at 60 amps, like a 60 amp breaker box, which isn't, is what we used to use in older houses. And I felt like suddenly we had 100,000 amps coming through. And I just felt my intellect and my intelligence was just firing on every neuron. And yet it isn't the brain. The brain's just this filter by which we receive information in this earthly form. But anyway, I just felt like I felt alive. And one of the things that I've heard this in NDEs and I didn't understand it, but the moment of my death, I felt like I had just awakened from a really intense dream. It already seemed dreamlike within seconds of this experience. It felt like my whole time on earth and all the misery and he said, she said, and they did this and they're not nice and blah, blah, blah. It felt like a silly dream. And I don't want to minimize the experience and the suffering that people go through, but it was like a slate wiper. It's like God said, yeah, you know what? That was all messy. That was all bad. That was all hard, but it's over.
Mhm.
It's really over now. I remember asking myself, so what did I leave on the gurney? And it was so clear to me. It was instantaneous. The answer was you left the anxiety, the grief, the guilt, the regret, the self recrimination, the self hatred. Oh my gosh. The last conversation I had with my husband was an argument over the phone before he did this thing. And I thought I should just take a vow of silence and never speak again. The thing I love the most are words. And now I should just never talk again. Look what my words did. And yet I've subsequently learned, I want to share this with anybody who's ever lost anyone to suicide. This is very common for that person who ends up their life to start an argument. It's like it gives them that last little bit of vitriol or upset or power or whatever to do this horrible thing. So that was, it took me a while to learn that one. So all that negative energy, negative thoughts, self-hatred is the only word I can think of. And also the anxiety was gone. And I remember thinking to myself, my whole life, which at this point had been 59 years, I had wondered what would I look like with no anxiety, with no fears, with no crippling panic about everything? What would I look like? And I thought, this is what I look like. And it's pretty cool. I like this person. Those were the thoughts I was thinking. And then the other thing that happened is I just felt such peace, such perfect peace. And I thought about the Bible verse, which I've always loved. The peace that passeth all understanding shall keep your hearts and minds through Jesus Christ. And I thought, this is that peace. This is what Paul talked about. This is the peace that we can't tell anybody. Let me tell you about this peace because they can't understand it. It is the peace that passes all of our human understanding. That's what I was experiencing. And I thought, this is great. This is fantastic. And the other thing that occurred to me very, very powerful is I remember thinking, our memories go with us. I don't know how long they last, but our memories go with us because I remember thinking, I didn't do this to myself. My children will not have the horror of having had a parent end their own life because this will be put down as a medical mistake, a medical procedure gone wrong, medical follow-up gone wrong. I didn't do this to myself. And I was so grateful. And I also remember thinking, I was so worried after this doctor had diagnosed me. He said, okay, we're going to start you on, let's see, it was cisplatin. It's a chemotherapy agent and then radiation. So it was going to be once a week chemo and once a day radiation. And I wasn't sure I wanted to do that because I've always been hypersensitive to drugs. And I thought, I'm probably going to be one of those people
Mhm.
that doesn't survive the treatment. So I was really debating what to do. But in this experience, I thought to myself, problem solved. Don't have to agonize about that decision ever again. And then the other thought I had was I had some unpaid bills. I mean, I had some medical expenses and I had some unpaid bills. And I tell you what, there's nothing worse on this earth than the medical bills that come when you are really sick. And I thought, that's not a problem either now. And I thought about all the bills, I had on my desk at home, and I thought, all those things have ceased to be a problem. But it was very interesting to me, even looking back on this. Two things are really interesting is one, I remember these things and I thought, not a concern anymore. And the other thing is that memory does not reside in the 7 pounds of hamburger meat we have in our skull. Memory resides in our essence, our consciousness, our whatever we defined that endures, that has immortality. Because I remember the details of this with such vividness. I mean, I can close my eyes and be back there in about 3 seconds. So
Mhm.
it's profound. But the other thing that happened shortly after, cracking myself up and thinking I'm so funny, because that was actually very calming to me to know that what I am goes with me. And I get my website's temporarydeath.com. I probably get 10 to 20 emails a day, every day, and I have so for about 5 or 6 months, and I read them all. I can't always respond to all of them, but I read them all and I try to pray for the people who ask for my prayers. But the number one comment I get from parents, I get a lot of emails from parents, typically mothers who've lost a child prematurely, which if the mom's alive, it's premature. They say, that story about your laugh went with you has calmed me so much because I know my daughter, my son, everything they really are is still intact. Everything that really made them fun and unique and interesting is still there. So I'm kind of a reluctant author on this deal and reluctant to really share it because I also get a little bit of hate mail, but part of the gig. But anyway, so it went on and on. And I don't know if it's the next thing. We tend to think of chronology like the past, the present, the future. And Einstein said to those of us who are committed physicists, the past, present, and future are only illusion, however persistent. So while I frame this in terms of this happened, that happened, and that happened, who knows? Who really knows the order of events? But my memory is shortly after this experience of laughing and, thinking, what did I leave behind? I felt this enormous spiritual being with me to my left, slightly behind me, towering over me. And I'm still in this blackness floating. And I turn my head to the left and I look up, which I think is pretty interesting. I'm looking over my left shoulder. Do I have a left shoulder? Don't know, but I'm certainly trying to look. I'm turning my head. But I said, literally with a lilt in my voice, I said, and who are you? And before I could finish the question, the answer was immediate. And the answer was, you, Rosemary, you are the image and likeness. I'm the original. And I'm like, wow, that's First Genesis 25 and 26. We're made in the image and likeness of God. Spent my whole life studying the Bible, trying to figure out what exactly does that mean to be made in the image and likeness. But hearing it phrased as I'm the original, I was like, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense now. And then I was on to the next thing. And the next thing was the angels or spiritual beings. They surrounded me. It's like I'm still floating. I'm still floating in this blackness. And they surrounded me. And if I had to summarize this whole experience up in 3 words, I could do it. And the 3 words would be, welcome home, dearie. My
Mm.
whole life, I felt like such a freak and oddball. I never fit in. I remember being on the playground in elementary school and just feeling so alone in the world as a kid. But in this experience, I found my tribe. I found my people. I found the ones that I had always wanted to fit in with. And here they were. And somebody said something along the lines of, I know this has been a very hard experience for you. What they said was this one was a hard one. They said, but look at you now. It's over and you're okay. And it's going to be okay. I was welcomed home with such an immense love. And I couldn't see these beings, but I felt them surround me and I felt their love. And I also remember thinking, hey, this blackness, this floating, this peace, I've been here before. What's up with that? I mean, like within this 59-year experience, I've done this before. And immediately, again, before I could even ask the question, the answer was immediate. And the answer was, remember that story your mom told you when you were in your 30s? Your mom said as an infant, you had become critically ill and you'd been given up for dead. And my mom was actually sent home from the hospital and told, this baby won't be alive by sunrise. We're not going to let you sit here and watch her die. And that was 1959, different world. So my mother left the hospital and spent the entire night with a friend praying for me. And she said the next morning she walked into the hospital, no news is good news. She hadn't gotten a call in the middle of the night that I was gone. She said she walked into the hospital and there was, rushed to the nursery and there was a nun cradling me in her arms. And the nun said, this baby isn't better. She's healed. And it had been actually blood poisoning. I contracted a staph infection from the hospital. It took 3 weeks, but that's what had made me so sickly. And they had given up on me. They said my kidneys had failed. And they told my mother it won't be long before everything else goes too. So the angels, I knew that story, but the angels saying, yeah, you remember that? That wasn't actually a close call. You actually crossed over and we sent you back. And I thought, this explains a lot about my life that I would say, oh, you see the angels? Do you hear the angels? You see our neighbor just passed. He's walking through our living room. And, everyone would say, stop, stop, stop. And then I think that's part of the reason I felt like such an oddball. I've always felt a little bit in that world and, a lot in this one. So I was like, this explains 59 years of weirdness. Would have been good to know back then, but oh well, here we are now. And this just went on and on and on. I mean, it really did. And I went from floating in this blackness, having these wonderful conversations with the angels, to being in a white room. I don't know how I made the transition. And I don't know if the angels were like, you know what, we're going to have some fun here. And we're going to have a little memory blank, like, the Men in Black neutralizer thing or what neuralizer. That's what they call it, the neuralizer. But I don't remember the transition from that float into being in the white room. But next thing I know, I'm standing on my own 2 feet. There's something approximating 2 feet in a white room. There's a door in front of me, maybe 10 to 15 feet in front of me. And the room is perfect white, but it's kind of misty, foggy, almost like a pea soup fog. And it's very, but everything's so white. And the room is so bright, so full of light. And I'm in this room and I see the door and I think to myself, I don't know if I have feet or legs or the means by which I can get to the door, but I know I can. If I think about I want to be at that door, I will move with intention toward the door. Actually, I thought I'd perambulate, which I've always loved. That's a great word. Next thing I know, I'm moving to the door. I think it's under my own motive power. Don't know for sure. But as I'm walking to the door again, there's more conversations with the angels. And I pause as I'm walking through this mist, and I wanted to focus on an individual droplet of light or a droplet of the mist. And I thought, this is kind of weird trying to focus on mist. I mean, next time you're in a pea soup fog, think about looking at one drop of vapor. But the angel that was with me said, your spiritual eyes have not acclimated to this new environment, but what you're looking at is not a fog or a mist. It is particles of light. And they likened it to a spiritual car wash. And they said the muck and filth of the earth is being cleansed from you. And they explained that some people come to this experience, the crossing over, so entrenched with the idea that they are their illness, that they are this ugly disease process, or that they are this mental illness, or they are this problem, that they have to be cleansed from that muck in order to advance to heaven or the next realm, the next world. And they said that's what's happening is all the muck of the earth is being washed away from you. And this mist circled around me. It wasn't just falling, it circled around me, like did the swirling dance around me. And the angels told me at this point, and I don't really know how to put this in the words, but the message I was given was that if you decide to go back, you'll be restored to wholeness. I was like, okay, good to know. Out of my way, I'm doing the door. And because I really didn't want to go back. There are no words to tell you how much I did not want to go back. I truly felt, and I remember thinking this too. I felt like I had been granted good early release for good behavior. I really did. I felt like I had been given an out. Because what did I pray every day? Heal me or let me go. And healing didn't seem possible. I was too busted up. So as I'm advancing to this door, I really felt like telling the angels, move, I'm doing the door. I served 59 years, let me out of here. And 59 lonely years. And that was a blessing of meeting my husband, was I wasn't lonely anymore. And there were a couple Thanksgivings where he and I had Thanksgiving dinner, just the two of us. The kids are busy or friends or, you end up just the two of us. And I would look at him and I think, I'm not lonely. Because if you just have one person sitting across from you at the dinner table, that's a lot. That is a lot. So it'd been 59 very lonely years, and now he was dead and I was alone again. But I came to this door and the door was shut, which annoyed me because there's a song called Going Home. I originally became familiar with it in the movie The Snake Pit with Olivia de Havilland. Well, it talks about passing through an open door, and I'm like, that door's shut. Door ought to be open. But I got to the door and I put my right hand up to push through this door because there was no equivocation. I wanted to be gone. I want to be on that side, best possible speed. And as I did so, I paused and I had this thought, very powerful thought. And I asked the angel that was with me because now there was a spiritual being right by my side. And I asked the spiritual being, is this the divine will for my life? That a medical mistake sends me on? Because I wish I could communicate to people as much as I willfully wanted to go on. When you're in that place of perfect light and perfect love and perfect peace, all you want to do is the will of God. So I asked, is this the divine will for my life? And before I could even get past, is this the divine? The answer was no. But whatever you decide, you go with all of God's peace, you go with all of God's blessing and mercy and care and love. There isn't a wrong decision. And that was the answer to my second prayer. I was so tired of decisions. And this was a big one. And I thought, that's a pretty sweet deal. That as long as we're trying to do God's will, we're not going to make a wrong decision. Because if we do make a wrong decision, we may take the long way around the barn, but we'll circle back to where we need to be. So I said, okay, I'll take that deal. I want to go. I don't want to be here anymore. I want to go. And the next thing that happens, kind of funny, I saw the nurse who had shown me such motherly comfort. Had a vision of her. And to say it's a vision is way simple understatement. I felt like I was inserted into a physical scene where I'm in a hospital supply room with linens and medical supplies and all the accoutrements of medical care. And this nurse is sitting on a little metal stool, leaning forward, head in her hand, sobbing uncontrollably. And I observe this. I'm a silent observer to this scene. And the nurse says through tears, I promised that woman I wasn't going to let her die. And I
Mm.
lost her. I was like, "Oh, come on. She's about my age. She's seen people die. She'll get over it, you know? Sorry about it, but I gotta go." And then it got worse. I didn't just see that, I felt her grief and despair and that guilt. It just hit me right in the core of my being. I recognized that grief and guilt and regret is what I felt with my own husband's death, and I thought, if I can spare one person that much emotional pain, I think I have to go back.
Mm.
And in a millisecond, I was back in that hospital room, back on that gurney, looking up at the ceiling, back in this experience. And it's kind of funny, a nurse, because now instead of being left alone in this hospital room, I'm surrounded, they have everybody in that little ER in that room. And I'm in a different room. I got moved to a different room at some point in the experience. But it's so funny. A nurse was right in my face and she said, "What is your name?" And I said, "Rosemary." And she said, "What year is it?" And I said, "2018." And she said, "Where are you?" And I said, "A crummy excuse for an ER." I shared this story with a retired anesthesiologist, and he became emotional when I shared that part. He said, after somebody's been gone, because I was gone more than 10 minutes, no heartbeat, no nothing. He said, after somebody's been gone that long, we have to ask ourselves, am I doing the right thing in bringing them back? Because the interesting thing about dying from bleeding to death, which was officially my cause of death, the interesting thing about that is because I interviewed some medical personnel, interviewed an ER doctor for my book. When you have a patient that bleeds to death, you can't do CPR because you're just going to push more blood out of their body. So he told me, I love this quote. He said, first we have to patch the leak, refill the tank, and then we restart the heart. So now, according to medical belief, with more than 10 minutes without oxygen to the brain, I'd be compromised, I'd be a mess, blah, blah, blah. But, it's true. The Bible says it's true. God's ways are higher than our ways. There are spiritual laws that are so far above what we mortals can comprehend and understand. So I was in the hospital for several days, had a great time. I mean, it's all in my book, but I had angels come to the bedside and sing me songs. I asked one of the angels if I was going to die again because I still didn't feel 100% in that hospital, but I was still a little out of sorts. And ultimately, it took some time, but ultimately, I found another doctor and I said, I don't think I need these. Well, actually, I went back to my original oncologist and said, I don't need these cancer treatments. And he put mentally ill on my chart. No kidding. They do these patient portal things where you can go look and, yeah, he put mentally ill right on my chart. So I had to find another oncologist in another part of the state because the famous Dr. Fill in the blank was this big deal. And if he said it, it was right. And they insisted on doing a second surgery to ascertain that I was indeed cancer free. And they did the second surgery. And that doctor was pretty doubtful about my story that I'd been healed in heaven of cancer. And yet she woke me up, in recovery. And you're going, oh, but she shook me by the shoulders and she woke me up and she said, Rosemary, you're right. We examined all kinds of flesh in all kinds of places, and there's not one cell of cancer there. And my friend was waiting my friend's waiting in the waiting room for me. He said she burst through the doors, threw her arms around his neck, and said, she's right. And what she told him, beautiful quote, she said, her flesh is so pink and pretty and perfect. Were it not for the original diagnosis and test, I wouldn't believe she ever had cancer. And yet,
Wow.
frankly, it was a big deal. And so I love the doubters because I am kind of a intellectual, reporter. I love to read, I love to write, blah, blah, blah. And people they always like the naysayers, the doubters, they always like to say not nice things about these NDEs. And I've had them in my own life, in my own family, in my own circle. They say, oh, you're making it up. It never happened that way, blah, blah, blah. I say, okay, well, here's the thing. When I died, I had stage 2 cancer. When I came back, it was gone. So this wasn't just the brain shutting down. And the other thing that happened, I'd also had chronic shoulder pain. I had what else? I had a knee problem. I had a variety of ailments that simply vanished. And a friend of mine said, you didn't come back as Rosemary V2. You came back as Rosemary V27. I got a
Ah,
serious upgrade. So it was very profound, changed my life. As soon as I was better, I got my house ready for sale. I sold off that house with a white carpet, sold my fancy car. I had a brand new Camry. That was a nice looking Camry. I had a red Camry with a panoramic roof and a V6, 0 to 60 in 5.8 seconds, mated with an 8-speed transmission. Nice ride. White leather interior, macadamia. But I sold that car because I thought that car isn't me anymore. And I moved 1,000 miles to the Midwest, lived with a relative because I wanted to watch the corn grow. And people think I'm making that up. But have you ever watched corn grow? It's cool. It's really cool. I still love it. And then I ended up buying a house. My relative had some life-changing circumstance. I had to go buy a house, and I bought a little house is on the edge of a cornfield. So now I can look out the back window and just watch my corn grow. I love people think I'm making that up. I love watching anything grow because that was me. After this thing happened, they thought I was just like the seed that gets trounced down in the soil and the dirt and stomped on. So, well, she's never going to amount to anything. Look at her. She's a mess. But then suddenly you've got this beautiful plant. And I love color. Can't get enough color. Just love color. And I love watching things grow. So yeah, it changed me in a lot of ways. But I sold off all my earthly possessions. It was real cool. Before I sold, like I had a lamp, I had a lot of nice stuff because I was married to a fancy man. And so before I sold anything, I had this old chair that I toted around forever. It was an arts and crafts, green and green chair. And I would look at that chair and I'd say, God, this chair has been such a blessing to me for so long. But it's time for this chair to be a blessing to someone else. Please send me somebody who will love this chair as much as I do. And then I'd put it on, social media marketplace and invariably somebody would come see it and they'd say, I've spent months looking for something just like that. I'm so glad I met you. So yeah, I sold off everything and moved, and that was 6 years ago. Big life change.
I've written down so much. I mean, like, when you go into a restaurant for dinner and you're eating and you don't really like take time to think about the surroundings around you or even what you're tasting as you're eating, you're not even processing totally the conversation that's happening. It's almost like there's just so much in all that you said. We got to like slow down and unpack a couple of things.
Well, it's a
Um,
2-hour story, and I try to tell it in an hour, so there's that.
Amazing. You did a phenomenal job. I mean, it's just like this is one of my favorite podcast episodes ever. I like that you talked about that fog because I had an experience myself and I've shared this on the podcast, but just briefly, I was called to go out to Seattle. I took a couple extra days and I let spirit lead every step. And I ended up walking foot like stride by foot stride next to this beautiful woman. And we walked stride and stride for just blocks and blocks before she turned to me and she goes, "You're not from here, are you?" Long story short, we ended up spending the entire day together. We went back to the hotel and went out later. And I wish I would have kept in contact with her because at one point in our conversations, we were cold in Seattle. We went into a Starbucks and got some drinks, sat down. And I remember her talking in a language. And that my thought was, she's not speaking English anymore. And then I go, that's not even a language I'm familiar with in the earth. Like, I studied history in college. I studied different languages, not very well, but I know what they sound like. This wasn't a language that I knew. And then I look around the room and there's that entire and I've talked before about how this was a time in my life that was just so incredibly painful because I had just graduated from college. My mom had made the decision down to move to Florida. My sister was going with her. And I just knew in my heart it wasn't a move that I was supposed to take. But then I was alone here in Chicagoland. And I had ended up getting into a fight with my best friend from college, and we weren't talking at the time. And it was just one of the loneliest time in my entire life. Actually, the guy that I thought that I was going to marry one day ended up getting engaged. And I mean, just on every level possible where you could be disconnected from people, I was disconnected. This fog descended, and I've talked to people before who've had these near death, or I forget the term that you used, but it was,
Temporary death.
yes, so much more accurate. And they talk about this emotional clearing and healing that happens. And I didn't see that with the fog, but now that you say it, that's what it was. They were healing all of the pain of my mom moving away, losing that love, losing that friendship and being on my own, and at the same time filling me with so much strength. But I like that you talk about that fog being particles of light because as I've talked to people who've had these near death experiences too, they also say that that light energy are angels in a different form.
I don't doubt that. I think that we are always consistently surrounded by too many angels to count. And I don't think we take advantage of it. I had, one of the beautiful parts about this, because I do get some ugly mails, I get some ugly comments from my own family. I actually had a family member say, "You made this up." I'm like, well, you know what? I can tell you as a former reporter, if I thought somebody was making up a story like quite this grand, I'd say something like, "What hospital did this happen to at? Did you save the medical records?" And I did. But it's bizarre to me that people would rather just discount me and the whole story. But I was going to say one of the beautiful things is I get these emails from people, and one of the prayers somebody shared with me was somebody said they will pray when they're in dire straits. They'll pray, "Okay, angels, I don't know who's on duty right now, but I need some help. Show up and help." And I think that's part of the gig is we have to invite the angels into our life.
Mhm.
And I try to do that moment by moment because my life, people get this idea that I'm some guru. True story, I had a dentist appointment yesterday with a new dentist because I had a dentist that I liked and I moved to a different area, different part of the Midwest. Well, I mean, I moved like, an hour away, but I had to get a new dentist. So I was like, oh my gosh, what are they going to look at? What are they going to see? What are they going to say? What are they going to charge me? What's it going to be like? I stayed up all but 3 hours the night before because I was so anxious about this dentist. And people get this idea because I've been to heaven, I've had this temporary death experience, I've come back changed, but I still have a lot of stuff I'm working on. I mean, lots and lots and lots of stuff. I have a romantic partner with whom I have plenty of arguments for somebody who's so enlightened.
Yeah.
And actually, one day, I put this in my book. One day, I got really depressed, and I Googled NDE plus depression, and it's a thing. It's
Wow.
a thing because on one hand, you realize I was dead and I'm back now. And yet you realize this is hard to come back to.
Mhm.
And it's hard to fit in. And it's hard to listen to somebody. I remember shortly after my NDE, I was sitting around in a neighborhood circle full of women primarily talking, and they were talking about the deal they got on their shoes. And they got these shoes and they got them on a shoe sale. And they had to fight with the clerk to get them on this special sale and the two for one, blah, 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 blah. And all I can think is, how inane.
Yeah.
I don't want to talk about shoes. I want to talk about those flowers that popped up in the middle of the sidewalk. What a
Yeah.
beautiful spiritual example that is. So, yeah, it's very common to suffer depression after you come back from heaven because you're like, what am I doing here? I was out. I was clear. And now I'm
Oh,
back. Dag.
Rosemary, will you come back? Well, we're going to make this a two-parter. Will you tell everybody who listened to the episode today, and this was just, oh, I love, love, love talking to you. Will you tell everybody where they can find your book, where they can find you?
Yes, my book is Remembering the Light, How Dying Saved My Life. And by the way, it'll soon be available in audio. It's been uploaded now, just waiting. But it's at the world's biggest bookstore. Also, my website is temporarydeath.com if anybody wants to reach me. And there's a contact rose. Like I said, I do read every email and I try to respond to them, but it's a little overwhelming. But yes, I cherish every email. I read them, I think about them, and I love getting them.
Oh, I hear you on that. Before we go, Spirit's saying that I got to tell you this. This message has been coming in lately, and it's not just for me, it's for you too. That when we do this work, we have to remember that we're not to keep our eyes on the skeptics or those who have closed
Hmm.
hearts to the message, but that when we do the work, we're writing, we're speaking, only with eyes in view of those with open hearts, receptive to the message, because the angels have already primed them and they're ready, they're receptive, they're open, and they need the message for their journey.
I know that that's true, and it is way too easy to lose sight of. My friend points out that I get 98% beautiful emails, but then the 2% are so vicious, and they tend to just drag you away,
Yeah.
like just a wave coming to shore and pulling you back out. And I mean, I think a lot about what Jesus said, "Cast not your pearls before swine." And
Mhm.
I feel like sometimes I got to remember that. I
Yeah.
just got to remember what people will say vicious things, and I mean vicious things. And I'm like, how does that benefit you?
Yeah.
How does that make your day a little better to
Mm.
rip apart another human being? But anyway, but yes, that's a lovely message. And then it is hard to stick your neck out there and say, "Hey, I died and went to heaven and this thing happened." And people go, "What?"
100%, 100%. Well, you've got a friend in me, and I totally get
Thank
it
you.
because I get the same thing. Somewhere out there, there's a documentary about the guy who made 5-hour energy drinks, and he changed the motto within his company to not focus on the 1% who will just tear you to shreds, that you really focus in on the 90%, because he said he studied it within his company and they were spending the bulk of their time and energy, all of his employees, on that 1%. So he said, we're just going to let that 1% go. And we're going to focus
Wow.
all of our time, all of our energy, all of our love on the 99% who are open. And I'm just saying receptive.
Mm,
And he said it changed their entire company. So that's a
wow.
motto I've adopted too.
That's lovely. Well, thank you for telling me that.
Of course, of course. All my love, Rosemary, and we'll have you back
Thank you.
soon.
That sounds lovely.
I'd love to work with you if it resonates. Book a reading to get messages from your angels right away. Or join my membership or my Angel Reiki Mediumship School. What's the difference? The Angel Reiki Mediumship School certifies you in mediumship, angel messages, and energy healing all at once. Some join simply to develop all of their unique spiritual gifts to the max, and others want to start their own spiritual business. Both are perfect. You can take the Angel Reiki Mediumship School online with Zoom meetings or in person in Oak Brook, Illinois, in November or April. Bonus, when you register for the in-person Angel Reiki Mediumship School today, you also get the 8-week online program free with Zoom meetings included. So you can literally start today. How is that different from my membership? My membership gives you everything you need to care for and nourish your soul. The fact is, our world neglects the soul. Most people only attend to their own soul when they have a big life crisis. But your soul is not a problem to be solved. Your soul is starving to be seen, heard, nourished, and cared for. Your soul is speaking to you and it wants you to hear it. That's what my membership does. It nourishes your soul. It shows you there is an entire universe living within you, how you can access your own angels, messages, and live a life of wonder, magic, enchantment, and miracles. At your request, we've changed the membership so that you can join anytime, any month. You can purchase readings, the school, my membership, all over at theangelmedium.com. As we close today, ask your angels to be with you and allow these messages to speak to your heart. Your angels say you are connected to the universe, and the universe is connected to you. All you ever need is within you right now at this very moment. Stay true to yourself. Don't betray yourself by going against the intuitive feelings you get. Trust your own inner wisdom. Why? The world needs you. The world needs you to dream big and for you to discover what's possible for yourself. Step into the energy of all that you are. Smile, laugh, and allow your heart to be healed. Ask your angels to bring you big, big miracles, prosperity, and to open big doors. Believe in miracles. You have a big purpose, and friends, inspiration is everywhere. Everywhere you look, there are people in need of help, love, and support. Find a way to be of service. Start right now by asking yourself, what good shall I do this day? Love is who you are. Joy is your nature. Remember, God only ever has 3 answers to your prayers. Yes, not yet, or I have something so much better in mind you can't possibly believe it. Nothing is impossible, and nothing can stop your determined soul from succeeding. Now go about your day and expect the most wonderful things to happen.